One night, without warning, they sold her off to a traveling merchant, like she was just another piece of broken furniture. But destiny had a way of writing her story different, because that same road would soon cross paths with Elias Ward, one of the wealthiest ranchers in the West, and the loneliest. The night began like it was holding its breath. No moon, no sound, just the restless whisper of wind brushing through the dry grass outside the Mayfield farmhouse. Something felt wrong, too still, too heavy. Inside, the lantern flickered low, casting long shadows across the worn-out floorboards where a young woman sat, clutching her mother's old shawl like it still meant something. Her name was Clara. Folks around town called her that lame girl from the Mayfield place. But tonight, even the walls seemed to know her name in a different way, like they were saying goodbye. From the kitchen came voices, low, sharp. Her father's tone cut through the dark like a dull blade. "She ain't worth feedin'," he said. A pause, then the clink of silver. Clara froze. Her heart pounded so loud she swore they could hear it. She leaned closer to the door, her fingers trembling as she pressed against the wood. "I'll take her off your hands," another man said. His voice was cold, businesslike. "She can cook, can't she? Maybe clean." Her father grunted. "She walks slow, but she'll manage. Just don't bring her back." The words hit like a gunshot, but there was no sound of gunfire, just silence. That kind of silence that only comes when a soul breaks quietly. Outside, a horse neighed impatiently. Wheels creaked, and in that moment, Clara realized something bone-deep and final. By morning, she wouldn't belong to this house. Or maybe, she never really did. The wagon stood outside like a shadow that didn't belong to this world. Its wheels creaked in protest, the horses restless, as though they too knew something unholy was about to happen. Clara's father didn't meet her eyes. He just pointed toward the open door, jaw tight, the smell of whiskey thick in the air. Her mother stood behind him, arms folded, eyes red but dry, the kind of eyes that stopped crying a long time ago. "Get in," he said flatly. Clara didn't move. For a heartbeat, she thought maybe it was a nightmare, one of those strange dreams that fade when the sun hits. But the man waiting by the wagon, the merchant, wasn't made of smoke or dream stuff. His face was all hard angles and impatience. "Hurry up," he barked. When Clara hesitated, her father grabbed her arm, rough, unkind, and shoved her toward the wagon's edge. She stumbled, pain shooting through her bad leg, catching herself before she fell. The merchant snorted. "Lame, huh? Guess you weren't lying." Her father didn't answer, just took the silver coins. They jingled in his hand like they weighed more than she ever did. The wagon jolted forward before she could even look back. The dirt road stretched ahead, endless and empty, swallowing the sound of her quiet sobs. She clutched the edge of the wooden rail, feeling the night air bite her face. They rode for miles in silence. The merchant hummed to himself, some off-key tune that made the night feel colder. Every turn of the wheels carried her father from home, though home had never really been one. When dawn began to rise over the horizon, the land looked painted in shades of sorrow. Open plains, dry creeks, the bones of a once lively world. The merchant spat into the dust. "We'll stop at Sagebrush Valley. Got some buyers there. Folks always need a pair of hands." Clara's heart sank. She wasn't a person to him, just another trade. But deep down, beneath the ache and the fear, something stubborn began to stir. Maybe it was the wind whispering through the prairie grass. Maybe it was defiance. Whatever it was, it refused to break. And miles ahead, unseen in the rising sun, a lone rider paused on a ridge, watching the same wagon rumble through the dust. The morning sun crawled over the ridge, painting the sky in shades of copper and rose. The wagon groaned through the valley, its wheels kicking up lazy trails of dust. Clara sat hunched in the back, her hands bound in front of her with a strip of coarse rope, not tight enough to hurt, just enough to remind her she didn't belong to herself anymore. The merchant hummed as he drove, every note scraping her nerves raw. Her leg throbbed from the jolt of the ride, but she didn't complain. Complaining never changed anything in her life. It only made the silence louder. A hawk circled overhead, crying out once before disappearing into the light. The road ahead shimmered with heat, though the day had barely begun. That's when the merchant cursed under his breath. One of the wheels hit a rut and cracked. The wagon jerked sideways, throwing Clara hard against the sideboard. "Damn thing," he growled, jumping down. "Stay put." He walked off, muttering, leaving her alone on the road. Dust clung to her hair, her face, her heart. For the first time, she thought maybe this was where her story ended, forgotten between nowhere and nothing. Then, the sound of hooves, slow, rhythmic, confident. Out of the haze rode a man dressed in worn leather and dusted pride, his hat tilted low, shadowing eyes that missed nothing. The kind of man who carried his silence like a weapon. He reined in his horse beside the broken wagon. "You all right, miss?" His voice was deep, calm, with an edge of suspicion. Clara blinked up, shielding her eyes. I don't know," she whispered. The merchant came stomping back, face sour. "Ain't your business, mister. Just a hired hand I'm taking to work off debt." The rider's gaze flicked from the rope on her wrists to the tremor in her voice. His jaw tightened. "She don't look hired," he said softly. The merchant laughed, uneasy. "Some folks need a firmer start." For a long moment, the air hung heavy between them. The wind, the dust, the unspoken threat. Then the stranger dismounted, boots hitting the dirt with quiet authority. "Name's Elias Ward," he said, "and I reckon you best fix that wheel quick, before I start asking what kind of work a tied woman's supposed to do." The merchant hesitated, then turned away, muttering. Clara looked up at the man who'd stopped the world just by speaking. And for the first time in her life, someone looked back at her. Not with pity, not with disgust, but with recognition. The merchant didn't say much after that. One look at Elias Ward was enough to turn his swagger into silence. He fixed the wagon wheel with trembling hands, all the while glancing at the rancher like a man afraid of his own shadow. Clara sat still, unsure whether to hope or hide. The stranger's presence filled the air, steady, calm, but dangerous in the way thunder warns before it speaks. When the wheel was fixed, Elias walked to her side, cutting the rope from her wrists with a pocket knife that gleamed in the sunlight. The blade never wavered. "You're free to ride with me, if you want," he said quietly. The merchant scowled. "She's mine till I get paid." Elias's eyes lifted, slow and sharp. "Then send me the bill," he said, flipping a gold coin that landed in the dirt between them. "That should cover your conscience." The merchant grunted, snatched the coin and climbed back onto the wagon. "Suit yourself. Ain't worth the trouble." As the wagon rattled away, a strange stillness settled. The wind caught Clara's hair, and for a heartbeat she couldn't breathe. Elias gestured toward his horse. "Can you ride?" She hesitated. "Not well." He nodded once. "Then we'll go slow." He helped her up, careful not to startle her, his hand steady under her arm. The warmth of his touch startled her more than the motion. It wasn't pity. It was respect, quiet and unspoken. The world rolled by in silence as they rode toward the distant hills. The scent of sage and wild dust filled the air, the horizon painted gold by the sinking sun. After a long while she spoke. "Why'd you help me?" Elias didn't look at her. "Didn't sit right," he said. "Some things a man shouldn't look away from." The road bent toward a wide valley. Down below, nestled beside a silver creek and a grove of cottonwoods, lay the kind of place Clara thought existed only in dreams. Vast fences, grazing horses, whitewashed barns glowing in twilight. "That's my ranch," Elias said simply. "Silver Creek." Clara's voice trembled. "You're taking me there? Till you figure where else you're meant to be." The words lingered like promise, soft, unsure, but real. As the first stars blinked awake above the open plains, Clara realized something she hadn't felt in years. For the first time since the night she was sold, the road didn't feel like it was running away from her. It felt like it was leading her somewhere. By sunrise, Silver Creek Ranch came alive with sound. The soft nickers of horses, the rhythm of boots in the dirt, and the hum of work that never truly ended. To Clara, it all felt like another world. The fences stretched for miles, the hills rolled like waves of gold, and the house itself looked carved out of the morning light. Elias handed her a tin cup of coffee. "You can stay here a while," he said simply. "Help with the smaller chores till that leg rests." Clara nodded, eyes down. "I can work. I always could." He gave a faint smile, the kind that vanished before it could be caught. Then he turned toward the stables, his voice carrying over his shoulder. "We'll see." By mid-morning, the ranch hands had already started whispering. Two men leaned against the fence posts, smirking. "Boss must be losing his mind. Bringing in a crippled stray?" one said. The other laughed. "Maybe he's got a soft spot for the helpless." Clara heard every word, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she bent to her task, feeding the foals, brushing their coats, her movements slow but sure. The young mare nuzzled her palm, and something inside her eased for the first time in months. Later, when Elias returned, he noticed, "That one don't take to strangers easy," he said. "She just needed someone to see her," Clara whispered, eyes still on the horse. For a long second, their silence held more weight than words. By dusk, the ranch hands stopped laughing. They watched as Clara worked through pain and exhaustion, never asking for help. When the last chore was done, she sat beneath the cottonwood trees, the sound of crickets soft around her, the creek murmuring nearby. For the first time in her life, the whispers in the wind didn't sound cruel. They sounded like belonging. By evening, the sky over Silver Creek turned the color of bruised steel. The storm was building, the kind that didn't ask permission. The air grew heavy, still and sharp, humming with electricity. Clara stood by the barn, watching clouds roll in like a dark army. Horses shifted nervously in their stalls, ears flicking at distant thunder. She felt it in her chest too, that tightness, that pulse of warning that something was about to break. Elias was out on the far ridge checking fences when the first flash tore across the sky. Thunder followed, deep and rolling, shaking the ground. The ranch hands shouted to close the gates, but the wind had already turned wild, ripping through the valley like a beast. Rain began to fall, first in drops, then in sheets. Clara ran to secure the stable doors, her limp slowing her only slightly. The youngest stallion, Ashfire, screamed and kicked at the gate, terrified. A second later, he broke free, bolting toward the open field. "Someone stop him!" one man yelled. But no one moved. The lightning was too close. Clara didn't think, she just ran. Her skirts tangled around her legs, mud splashing up to her knees, every step a knife of pain. The rain blurred everything, sound, sight, reason. But she kept going, calling his name through the storm. "Ashfire, easy boy!" The horse reared, hooves slicing the air inches from her face. For one heartbeat, it felt like death brushed her cheek. Then, a shout. Strong arms grabbed her from behind, pulling her clear as the stallion thundered past. Elias. He held her against his chest, his coat soaked, his breath harsh against her ear. "You could have been killed," he said, voice low and furious. "I couldn't just let him die," she whispered. Her words trembled, but her eyes didn't. They burned steady through the rain. Elias looked down at her, rain streaming down his face. Lightning flashed, and for that brief second he saw everything. The fear, the courage, the wild defiance of a woman who'd been broken and still refused to bend. The storm roared around them, but inside that moment there was nothing but silence, the kind that only happens when two hearts start to recognize each other. He didn't speak again. He just led her back to the barn, hand never leaving her shoulder, the rain washing away everything except what was real. And when the doors shut behind them, Silver Creek Ranch felt different, like the wind had carried in something new, something neither of them were ready to name. The storm had passed, leaving Silver Creek Ranch dripping in quiet. Rain pooled in the dirt, reflecting a sky bruised with twilight. Clara sat on the edge of the barn steps, her hair plastered to her face, eyes fixed on nothing and everything at once. Elias leaned against the door frame, coat still wet, arms crossed. He didn't speak immediately, never did unless it mattered. The silence was heavy, almost tender. "You could have gotten yourself killed," he said finally, voice rough around the edges. I had to," she whispered. Her eyes met his, and for the first time she let a piece of herself show. The shame, the fear, the defiance. "I've spent my whole life being careful. Too careful. Always waiting for someone else to decide if I'm worth saving." Elias's jaw tightened. "I know what that feels like," he admitted softly. "Lost someone I couldn't bring back. Thought I'd never care again. Thought it'd be easier if I shut the world out." Her hand went to her leg, the old limp still aching from the storm. "I've been sold and abandoned. Seen people look at me like I'm broken. Useless." He stepped closer, the wet wood creaking under his boots. "You're not broken," he said quietly. "Not to me. Not ever." Something shifted. For the first time since arriving at Silver Creek, Clara let herself breathe. She realized he wasn't pitying her, he was seeing her. The sun broke through the clouds, gold spilling across the creek. Water ran over stones, glinting like tiny sparks of hope. Elias glanced at her again. "We've both been carrying ghosts," he murmured. "But maybe we don't have to carry them alone anymore." Clara's lips trembled into a faint smile. For the first time in months, maybe years, she believed in the word maybe. The barn behind them smelled of wet hay and something warmer. Possibility. And in that quiet, they realized something neither had expected. Their hearts had already begun to recognize each other. Morning at Silver Creek arrived calm, almost reverent, as if the storm had washed away more than just mud and dust. Clara stepped out of the cabin, stretching stiff muscles and letting the early light fall across her face. She approached the stables, careful but determined. The young horses whinnied. Recognizing her voice, she smiled softly, brushing their coats with hands that had learned tenderness through pain. Each motion was deliberate, confident, proof that weakness didn't define her. Elias watched from the fence, quiet as always, leaning on the rail. He said nothing, just observed, and Clara felt without words that he understood. Not pity, not curiosity, real understanding. By mid-morning, she was helping with the chores that required precision and patience. She repaired fences, tended the garden, even carried feed to the barn hands without complaint. Her limp slowed her only slightly, but her determination made her stronger than anyone guessed. The ranch hands stopped whispering. They watched silently, surprised by her resilience, unsure how to respond. Clara didn't care. She had begun to shed the weight of others' judgment, step by step, task by task. At the creek, she knelt to pull water for the horses, the sun sparkling across the ripples. Elias approached, hands in pockets, boots crunching softly in the dirt. "You've changed since the storm," he said quietly. "Stronger than I thought." Clara looked up, startled. I didn't know if I could ever." Her voice trailed off, lost in the creek's murmur. He smiled faintly. "Sometimes the world doesn't see what's inside, but I do." Something warmed in her chest, not quite love, not yet, but the ember of hope. For the first time, she realized she could belong somewhere. The sun climbed higher, birds sang, the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and Silver Creek Ranch seemed alive in a way it hadn't been before. Clara took a deep breath, the ache in her leg, the sting of her past, all part of the rhythm of the day. And somewhere, deep in the silence between chores and quiet glances, she began to believe in herself again. The sun had barely cleared the ridge when whispers began drifting through the ranch. Clara noticed them first in the way the men's laughter faltered when she approached, their eyes flicking to her with curiosity wrapped in suspicion. "She thinks she belongs here," one of the hands muttered, leaning against the fence, arms crossed. "Boss has a soft spot," another said, shaking his head. "Never seen him like that before. Bringing in some crippled girl like she's special." Clara felt the sting of their words, but she didn't stop. She moved through the chores with quiet determination, brushing horses, mending fences, carrying water. Every step a statement she refused to apologize for. Elias watched from the house porch, his shadow falling across the yard. He noticed how her hands worked, how her eyes stayed steady despite the murmurs. He felt a quiet pride, but also a flicker of protectiveness he didn't yet understand. Later, near the creek, one of the younger ranch hands dared to approach. "I don't get it," he said. "How can she do all this and still walk like that?" Clara looked at him straight into his eyes, calm but unyielding. "Because strength isn't always in the legs," she said softly. "Sometimes it's in the heart. You'll learn that someday." He opened his mouth, but she turned and walked away, leaving him staring at her retreating back. From the porch, Elias exhaled slowly. The way she carried herself, despite pain, despite gossip, despite everything, stirred something inside him he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, the ranch wasn't just a place of work. It was a place where courage had a name, and he could feel it every time she moved. And somewhere between the murmurs, the dust, and the creaking of the fences, Clara realized that she wasn't just surviving Silver Creek, she was beginning to belong. The morning air carried the scent of dust and anxiety when the riders appeared on the ridge. 3 familiar faces, harsh and unwelcoming. Clara's heart froze. Her father, flanked by 2 men she barely recognized, rode hard, eyes full of expectation and entitlement. "You there," her father called, voice rough. "Girl, you belong to us. Hand over what's owed or things get difficult." Clara's chest tightened. For years she'd been afraid of this moment, afraid of their voices, their judgment, the way they could make her feel small with a single word. Elias stepped forward, silent and imposing, shadow falling over her. His hand rested lightly on the reins, but his presence was enough to make the men hesitate. "She's free," Elias said, voice calm but edged with steel, "and she's not going anywhere." Her father's lips curled into a sneer. "You bought her, paid her off. She's ours." Clara drew in a slow breath. "You sold me once," she said, voice steady and cold, "and you'll never own me again." The words landed like stones in the dirt. The men faltered. For the first time, Clara felt the strength of her own voice, her own will. The same will that had carried her to Silver Creek, that had carried her through storms, through ridicule, through pain. Elias's eyes met hers, a silent affirmation. She was no longer the girl tied to a cart, abandoned in the dust. She was hers. And together, they turned back toward the ranch, unshaken, unbroken, and finally, free. The sun hung low over Silver Creek, painting the valley in molten gold and shadow. Clara sat on the porch steps, the warmth of the day settling into her shoulders, the creek murmuring softly nearby. Elias leaned against the railing, silent, watching her move with quiet admiration. "You handled them well," he said at last, voice low and even. Clara turned unsure. "Handled who?" "Your family," he said. "The ones who tried to take what isn't theirs. You didn't flinch. You didn't beg. You stood your ground." Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of recognition. For years, she'd been invisible, dismissed, judged, and now this man, strong, stoic, untouchable in the eyes of the world, looked at her like she mattered, truly mattered. I didn't know if I could," she admitted. Elias stepped closer, boots quiet on the wooden porch. "I've seen fear before, but what you have, courage and hope. Hope most people lose long before they know it." Clara's lips trembled. For the first time in years, she didn't feel broken, she felt seen. He extended a hand, not commanding, but inviting. "The world can be cruel," he murmured, "but it doesn't have to be. Not if you're willing to let someone in." Her fingers brushed his, hesitant at first, then sure. A spark, fragile, unspoken yet undeniable, passed between them. In that quiet moment, with the valley stretching endless and golden behind them, Clara realized something profound. Elias didn't just see her leg, her past, or her scars. He saw her. And in his eyes, she found something she had thought lost forever. Belonging, trust, and the first stirrings of love. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers, the promise of new beginnings, and the quiet truth that nothing would ever be the same. The valley shimmered under the morning sun, golden light spilling across Silver Creek Ranch. Horses grazed lazily, the creek whispered over stones, and the cottonwoods swayed gently, carrying the scent of wildflowers. The entire town had gathered, friends, neighbors, and even curious ranch hands to witness what felt like a miracle. Clara's place in the world, fully claimed. She stepped down the aisle, her limp steady but proud. Her dress was simple, elegant, reflecting the strength and resilience that had carried her through storms, through gossip, through abandonment. Each step echoed with courage. At the altar, Elias waited. His eyes held warmth, reverence, and a quiet awe. No words could capture what he felt, but his gaze said everything. He had seen her through every shadow, every fear, every struggle, and he loved what he saw. When the preacher asked, "Do you take this woman to be your wife?" Elias's voice was steady, deep, and full of certainty. "I already did, the day I saw the truth in her eyes." A hush fell, then a ripple of smiles and tears spread through the crowd. Clara met his hands in hers, and together they smiled, the kind of smile that carries hope, forgiveness, and joy all at once. The bells rang over the valley. Laughter and music filled the air. For Clara, for Elias, and for everyone who had doubted her, it was proof of something simple yet extraordinary. Love sees beyond weakness. And under the wide-open sky of Silver Creek, two hearts finally found their home. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Wild West Eternal Love. Tell us in the comments, what part of Clara's journey moved you the most? And stay tuned for more timeless tales of love, courage, and redemption from the untamed West.